The Empire of Fire 2, Part 2. As promised, this will focus again on some key events in my alternative history, specifically the beginning of the current empire. How was it established? It was established with fire by simply burning all the food forests in which native peoples lived. Very easy way to defeat, well, I can't say enemy. There was no animosity between the ambitious empire builders and the native peoples of the world. None at all, just pure ambition rolling over the world with fire and other unconventional weapons. No, it was not done with swords. All the stories about colonial people, empires marching with armies, it's all nonsense. You cannot build an empire with swords. People will just rebel, of course. You wouldn't enslave people who know that their women and children or men were slaughtered. But something very different happened. First burning, then tricking, manipulating the survivors into fortress prisons, and subterranean prison farms. Keep them there for a generation or, well, 2 or 3 generations maybe, until their traditions, ways of thinking, their consciousness is completely ruined. Start brainwashing them with religious concepts that help to placate and pacify them. Also introduce alcohol and drugs and various foods that help to placate and weaken them. Very simple. Well, very different, at least. Today's presentation will also include a little evidence that the only empire, the present empire, has used, for lack of a better word, well, no, fire accelerants in the past. The rather suspicious spates of so-called wildfires that keep rearing their heads every year. Of course, they are intentional, manufactured, and this is not the first time it was done in the past. Not just burning forests with, as I argue, with large magnifying glasses, attached to fleets of airships. Oh, it was a lovely Tartarian world, wasn't it? Yes. So they try to tell us, all these alternative channels that tried to tell us that Tartaria was a beautiful world. Something we lost. Oh dear. No, no, no. Tartaria is simply another word for a stage of the current empire. An empire that used large magnifying glasses and airships to burn the world's forests, food forests specifically, human life-supporting forests. And airships are very ideal for that. You couldn't really do it with our fast-moving airplanes. Airships also have the ability to move low over the ground very safely, low over forests. They were perfect for the purpose. With that, let me begin. This could be, I don't know, 45 minutes. The secret past. And of course, I am using the Bible today again to support my views. Of course, the literal interpretation won't work, but there is a subtext just waiting to be decoded or discovered. I'll begin. The key event for all the Jewish prophets is the exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. This event, however, is a fictional event based on the real event of the world-conquering cabal destroying the forest homes of the world's native peoples. And it's based on their manipulating the survivors into their fortresses and underground prison farms. This horror probably continued for more than a century as the empire of fire spread over the earth. Some of the fake Jewish prophets lived before the fake exile of Jews to Babylon, and some lived during or after the disaster. The prophets always blamed the Jews for this disaster. Therefore, they constantly called the exiled Jews to become morally accountable and spiritually renewed. That is the mocking voice of the sadistic WCC. The prophets never blamed the exile on the fact that a tyrant named Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon forcibly exiled Jews from Jerusalem into Babylon. Instead, they accuse all Jews of being immoral and idolatrous. Imagine if Nazis used the same excuse. If they said, God commanded us to punish the Jews. Oh, wouldn't that be delicious? Yeah, we can add a New Testament to the Bible. The Nazi Testament, in which the Nazis punish those materialistic, mammon-worshipping Jews. A lovely story. Lovely testament that would be. Let's skip a little bit to imperial pyromania. Genesis gave us the metaphor in which a sword is a solar weapon. The large magnifying glasses used to burn our garden forests not long ago. Ezekiel 21 extends the sword is the solar weapon metaphor, which Ezekiel disguises. But Ezekiel disguises the connection by identifying Babylon with God's sword of judgment. However, on close examination, Ezekiel clearly did not write about Babylon or a sword. As we learned in Debt's Land and Jerusalem, the word Jerusalem refers to all the forest gardens destroyed by the WCC with its quote-unquote swords, actually solar weapons. Let me skip over to that section, Debt's Land and Jerusalem, and share what I discovered about that word Jerusalem. I know we assume it's a Jewish word, but the truth might be otherwise. Oh, let me share my screen with you. I'm so inconsiderate. Like everyone to see all my mistakes. I'm not perfect. Here we go. Linguists believe the name Jerusalem means the Lord will provide peace. They correctly argue that the second half, Salem, derived from the Arabic word salam, meaning peace. Oh, it's already Arabic. Not so Jewish, is it? But their argument for the first half of Jerusalem is weak, as it claims the Hebrew spelling, the Hebrew word, Yerushalayim. Oh yeah, that's the Hebrew word for Jerusalem, Yerushalayim. They think it was partly derived from the Hebrew word Yereh, which has little in common with Yeru, a little. My interpretation that Jerusalem symbolizes the ancient forests in which our ancestors lived peacefully is supported by not one, but two Indian origins for the word, for the fragment, Jeru. Turns out that Jeru or Guru is a Indian word for the cashew tree, and Cheru is a Dravidian Indian word for some native tree species. So together with the Arabic, we have peaceful forest. Instead of Lord of Peace. Really? Why would you name a city Lord? Um, well, why would you name it a forest of peace? But maybe that's what it was once upon a time. You know, we have the cedars of Lebanon. Were the environs of Jerusalem also always so barren? There is a little tree planting project. It's not so little, maybe. Already completed, but generally it's quite desertified. And I suspect that isn't its natural state. I suspect that for most of our deserts. Well, where did I stop before switching? Okay. Ezekiel. So this will present some evidence that the prophets, when they spoke of swords, were actually speaking of a device that produces fire. And I argue that is a large magnifying glass, a weaponized magnifying glass. I quote, a sword, sharpened and polished, sharpened for the slaughter, polished to flash like lightning. The sword is appointed to be polished. Who appoints a sword to be polished? But if it's a large object, like a large magnifying glass, there would be a time to polish that. Ezekiel's sword is no ordinary sword. It produces intense heat and light. It's compared to lightning. No one polishes swords, not to my knowledge, but the glass lens must be polished to be effective. And they can flash with the light they amplify. In subsequent verses, not copied for lack of space, Ezekiel repeats that the sword must be polished and will flash like lightning. In the absence of the flashing sword, Ezekiel's God threatens to become a fire-exhaling dragon. Quote, I will pour out my wrath on you and breathe out my fiery anger against you. You will be fuel for the fire. Yes, the pyromaniacal God. Who needs Satan and hell when you have this God? Our other prophets are also obsessed with fire imagery. This is from Isaiah. Quote, surely wickedness burns like a fire. It consumes briars and thorns. It sets the forest thickets ablaze so that it rolls upward in a column of smoke. By the wrath of the Lord Almighty, the land will be scorched, and the people will be fuel for the fire. And I think there might be a pun there. Surely wickedness burns like a fire. Is that a pun on the fact? I think the fact that the root of wicked is wick, the wick of a candle, which always burns very well. Oh, the wicked. Who made our language? Who made the word wick, the root of wickedness? Maybe pyromaniacs, psychopaths. Again and again, Isaiah the psychopath celebrated the power of God's punishing fires. He even fantasized that God's breath would help feed his hellish fires. Quote, its fire pit has been made deep and wide. Sounds like hell. With an abundance of fire and wood. Sounds like forests on fire. The breath of the Lord, like a stream of burning sulfur, sets it ablaze. Oh, yes, I'll move that to my brimstone section, maybe. It sounds like God is breathing out a fire accelerant. Sulfur is a fire accelerant. 30 times Isaiah used the word fire in exaltation, and Jeremiah 30 times also. Oh, is that a coincidence? Other prophets are no better. They never speak of thirst-quenching rains and streams, and God never saves anyone from fire. I wonder, was the Bible written by pyromaniacs and psychopaths? You don't say. Brimstone, God's fire accelerant. The WCC is presently using fire accelerants to start wildfires around the world, but especially, maybe especially in North America, Europe. Let's not forget Australia. Was it 2, 3 years ago? They were quite the inferno on the East Coast. Their intention is to frighten people into believing climate change is real and that the solution is to abandon rural areas, the wilderness, and to live in low energy, no car, smart city prisons. This means history is repeating itself because in the past the WCC used brimstone as a fire accelerant to destroy food forests and trick people into their fortress prisons and subterranean prison farms. The Bible usually speaks of brimstone raining down from above because it was spread onto forests from airships. Quote, then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Oh, heaven is quite the arsenal, loaded with brimstone. I assume Sodom and Gomorrah were stone cities, for trees are not available near the Dead Sea. But stone does not burn. Therefore, Sodom and Gomorrah were not stone cities, were not near the Dead Sea, not the one we know now. And they were instead located near a forest. Well, they're probably just metonyms, symbols for the villages that would have existed all over the world's food forests. In the next verse, God threatens to destroy the land of people who commit idolatry. Quote, so that the whole land is brimstone and salt and burning, so that it is not sown, nor bears, nor any grass grows therein, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in his anger, which the Lord burned with brimstone. Thus God committed biocide and genocide. No trees or forests are mentioned, but they are implied because the land was once fertile. The whole land is brimstone. No grass will grow. The cities of Admah and Zeboim were added to Sodom and Gomorrah in order to imply that no one will be spared. Why, how is that? For the name Adma, the words Adma and Zeboim imply really everyone together. And how is that? It's because Adma and Zeboim, Adma starts with the first letter of the alphabet, Zeboim with the last. So from first to last, that means everything, everyone. In addition, uh, Adma is a phonoanagram. You know, it sounds almost like Adam, reads almost like Adam. It has all of Adam's letters. Maybe that's a new word I made. Phonanogram. And the second word, Zeboim, might refer to Eve, the first woman. For Zebo is Uzbek from Uzbekistan. It's an Uzbek word for beautiful. And if we add the missing letters, we have I am beautiful. A nice title for a woman. Within a few verses later, within just a few verses, the book of Job refers to the burning of food forests, the hunger that follows, the dying of the trees, and the vanishing of the native man into a world of darkness. I quote, "His strength shall be hunger bitten, and destruction shall be ready at his side. His confidence shall be rooted out of his tabernacle, and it shall bring him to the king of terrors." Who writes like this? Only sadists. It shall dwell in his tabernacle, because it is none of his. Brimstone shall be scattered upon his habitation. His roots, trees, shall be dried up beneath, and above shall his branch be cut off. His remembrance shall perish from the earth, and he shall have no name in the street. He shall be driven from light into darkness and chased out of the world. This is about the native peoples of the world and their forests. Branches cut off, literal branches, but also the branches of their families. They lived in large tribal units. His remembrance shall perish, yes, because these people were either killed or forced into prisons where their culture was slowly eliminated. Their memory of the past was lost, as would happen after a couple of generations, unless you have books. They were not literate. And so the horror of the past was forgotten, partly with the help of, no doubt, some drugs, alcohol, enormous suffering, trauma, and, well, who knows how the human mind works in such a state. Job, by the way, kind of represents the native peoples of the world. He lost everything because Satan took everything. And then he had to get a job. That's the pun, of course. Independent, free people were forced into the empire, forced to work, forced to have jobs. Well, here again, the Bible mentioned dropping brimstone from above. This is from Psalms. I quote, "Upon the wicked he shall rain snares, fire, and brimstone." Isaiah imagines God exhaling brimstone, presumably from above. The breath of the Lord like a stream of brimstone. Again, Isaiah describes a land ruined by brimstone. In verse 34:9. Ezekiel imagined a rain of brimstone. I will rain upon him and upon his bands. A nice synonym for tribes. An overflowing rain and great hailstones, fire and brimstone. The book of Revelation deploys the word brimstone with more creativity. The narrator sees soldiers wearing breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone while riding horses with leonine heads, issuing fire and smoke and brimstone. Together they killed a third part of men. That sounds about right. Probably, I don't know how many people died in this Operation Global Fire. Global, what's the bet? Global arson. The text does not say the soldiers killed sinners, just men. It's indiscriminate killing. And why men, but not women? Well, sometimes men also includes women. It's just a word. In the past. Maybe a better explanation is that human farmers, the WCC, do not need many men. A few men to be the studs, or maybe they chose studs from among themselves. I'm doubtful, but in any case, if you're rearing livestock, you don't need many males, just lots of females. Revelation 14:10 warns people who worship the beast that they shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. Wow, this contradicts what every Christian believes about angels and the Lamb, which is that they would never hurt anyone with fire and brimstone. Well, maybe they're not hurting anyone here. They're just witnessing. Why would they want to be present to see the torture of people in hell? Because they are sadists. Yes, the authors, of course, were sadists. The authors of this world are sadists. 3 consecutive chapters in Revelation have the last 3 mentions of brimstone in the phrase, quote, the lake of fire and brimstone in chapter 19, 20, and 21. What is a lake of fire and brimstone? I suppose it refers to sulfurous lakes, which do exist in many regions of the world. And of course, nothing can live in them, which is precisely why they're mentioned in Revelation, a book obsessed with killing everything. What happened after the food forests were... One moment. What happened after the food forests were... One moment. I almost burned down my house. What ironies. Irony, too much for me. What happened after the food forests were destroyed? Well, that marked the beginning of agriculture. I posit that agriculture began slowly, no more than, 800-900 years ago, and then very intensely about 200 years ago, and exploding 100 years ago. Now it's everywhere. Everyone is dependent on agriculture. And that's a very different beast from forest gardening. All right. The curse of agriculture. Agriculture came after the destruction of our food forests. Contrary to popular belief, agriculture was not an improvement over agroforestry, permaculture, or forest gardening. Call it what you will. Agriculture is much more labor intensive, produces ugly environments, causes erosion, depletes soils of nutrients because it ships food to urban centers, and it provides inferior nutrition. Of course, the Bible admits none of this. Instead, it presents agricultural work as a peaceful, honorable, and normal occupation. Well, it was normal and the dominant form of work, let's say 100 years ago. I quote, "He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plows and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore." Oh, isn't that nice? Instead of being afraid of fake wars and wasting time and money on fake wars, God says, we will enslave ourselves to the plow, God's symbol for agriculture, and try not to laugh, the civilized world. Quote, when a farmer plows for planting, does he plow continually? Does he keep on breaking up and working the soil? Obviously, no one can do anything continually, so God's rhetorical question is a stupid question. But farmers do plow annually, and each time they plow, they destroy the integrity of the soil. God didn't give us that knowledge because the authors wanted us to be ignorant, wanted us to eat unnutritious food. And now, after less than a dozen generations of farming, our soils are weak and dependent on chemical fertilizer, and we are weaker and sicklier than our ancestors. I quote, Micah of Moresheth prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah. He told all the people of Judah, "This is what the Lord Almighty says. Zion will be plowed like a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of rubble. The Temple Hill a mound of overgrown thickets, overgrown with thickets." This is delicious irony. First, the plow is a symbol of peace, and now it's a weapon with which to destroy Jerusalem. Of course, as we know, Jerusalem secretly represents the food forests of the world. Destroying or plowing over Jerusalem means giving nature no chance to rebuild the forests. I quote, I am concerned for you, Israel, and will look on you with favor. You will be plowed and sown. Well, Jeremiah's God spoke of punishing Jerusalem with a plow, but Ezekiel's God promises to favor Israel with a plow. What is the effect of reading such a contradictory book blindly? Ever wonder why Bible fans can't think straight? Next, Hosea's God speaks. I quote, they make many promises, take false oaths, and make agreements. Therefore, lawsuits spring up like poisonous weeds in a plowed field. Hosea's God forgot to mention that many weeds are edible and that weeds grow because nature abhors barren soil and wants to protect and improve it. I quote, Ephraim is a trained heifer that loves to thresh, so I will put a yoke on her fair neck. I will drive Ephraim. Judah must plow, and Jacob must break up the ground. All these farming, plowing metaphors. Apparently, Hosea's God considered two Jewish tribes livestock that would plow, which is a way to break up the ground. If you can extract the good and spiritual meaning from these metaphors, you are cleverer than I. Next, God commands Jews sold as slaves to Greeks. Yeah, imaginary history. To fight for justice by doing the following: beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weakling say, I am strong. Yeah, I'm stupid because I'm walking around with a sword or a spear. Well, it's of course ironic because God's rallying cry for idiots ready to die in a violent revolution is stupid. Not violent revolution no violent revolution will ever succeed at significantly improving our lives. And in fact, they will not succeed because the ruling class owns and controls everything. They can control all the weapons, and now they control the infrastructure, electric cables, internet cables, radio towers, oil wells, and refineries. And the financial system, they can shut everything down in the blink of an eye. Soon, if we submit, they'll have the power to freeze our bank accounts and credit cards, as they implied in Revelation 13:17, in which the sadistic WCC warns that your access to the marketplace will be controlled. Last little subchapter to share. It's called The Lost Native Tribes. This is one of the themes running through the prophets. What happened? Israel reputedly had 12 or 13, depends on how you count, tribes. And the majority of them simply disappeared, got lost. How did that happen? Well, in my opinion, in my reading, this makes good sense because I think we've lost the majority, maybe understatement, of the native peoples who once populated this planet. If they were not killed, their cultures were destroyed, lost. Why did many of Israel's tribes vanish? Yeah, no explanation is given, not in the Bible, but I suspect the world's native tribes were physically removed from the land into fortresses and subterranean prison farms. And yes, well, I've shared this already. I could get into some of the names of 10 of the 12 tribes. And many of them appear to be European, Western European, and some hint at African and other origins. For example, Reuben and variations of this name are common throughout Europe, not the Middle East. Simeon or Simon is common throughout Europe, not the Middle East, or less so. Zebulun is a fictional name. However, if we subtract the letters Z-U-L-U, we spell the name of a South African tribe, the Zulu. And the remaining letters are E-B-N, which can spell Ben, which is both a European and a Jewish name. Issachar, or Issachar, is a variation of Isaac, a European name. Dan is a European name and is short for Daniel. The tribe of Dan, aka the Dananites, is based on the Danann of Irish mythology. Gad is a variation of Ged, the Egyptian god of creation, whose name was derived from the European name Jeb. Asher could be related to the Swiss name Escher and could have a feminine derivation in Ashley. Naphtali is a near anagram for Italian, which is related to Latin. And according to Latin authors of the Roman period, naphtha was a highly flammable form of petroleum, first found in the Arabic region. And the last three letters of Naphtali spell Ali, Ali, which is an Arabic name. Ephraim, Joseph's son's name, has a Catholic origin in Afra, but it's also linked to Africa and the Egyptian god Ra. Manasseh has precedent in two 9th century Khazar kings named Manasseh. The imaginary Khazar Empire straddled Eastern Europe and Western Asia. So we did get hints of Africa twice in this little decoding. And well, who knows what Africa looked like in the past, as I mentioned in my previous Empire Fiction lecture. Oops, Empire Fire lecture. Farming experts, botanists actually, one man, I forgot his name, he worked in, maybe it was the Sahel, just south of the Sahara, and after much trial and error discovered that the best way to regreen the Sahel was to allow the buried stumps and many stumps of trees burned or cut long ago were somehow still alive and were always sprouting branches, shoots, which local people were cutting for firewood. And if they had, he encouraged them to stop that. And they did. And so some of the land was regenerating, regreening. And it's evidence, as I meant to say, that Africa was much greener in the past. Much of our world was much greener in the past. I live in Mexico, and the first thing that came to my mind the first thing that struck me when I saw much of Mexico was, where are the trees? Where are the trees? This place needs attention and help. I live in not far from Oaxaca City. There's a nice valley here that extends for, I don't know, maybe some 60, 70 kilometers. I don't think there are more than a handful of trees here that are more than 100 years old. I know of two. One of them happens to be the tree with the biggest girth in the world. It is not a fruit-bearing tree. The second one is a fruit-bearing tree, but the fruit is not so desirable. And the first one is standing near a church. It was deliberately left behind. Obviously, it's not natural for such a large area to have only one tree more than 100 years old, and significantly more than 100 years old, and many times larger than any other tree in the region. This is a sign of deliberate deforestation. And with that, well, maybe one more note. A good friend of mine, maybe former, no longer in touch, did work with so-called native peoples in Mexico and was extremely disappointed. It seemed to her that they are no different from the rest of us, do not know how to live on the land, at all, do not have a significantly different culture from the rest of us. It is more evidence that all native cultures were systematically erased, and what is passing for native cultures out there was planted and faked. I think I've spoken about that before in my lecture, The Indigenous PSYOP. Well, enough for today. I hope it's been interesting, informative, and it should inform action, of course, too. I don't want to be um, just entertainment, I suppose, in lack of a better word. We should prepare ourselves uh, mentally. We all need a little more mental fitness mentally for what's coming, what inevitably they do want to move us off the land. Again, this is a repeat, not the first time. And we must, of course, resist because the world being prepared for us, it will be worse than the one we're already in. Of course, it will be dressed up with some nice conveniences like the freedom to walk to work and the freedom to go shopping on foot from your house. Everything you need, overpriced, of course, and toxic, more toxic than ever. So let us prepare to resist and not fall for all the fake stories out there, all the fiction that gets passed as ancient history, medieval history. It's all lies. The story I'm giving you, as shocking and abbreviated as it may seem, makes so much more sense of the world we live in. With that, take care, stay healthy, prepare yourselves, but do not panic.